The letter trembled in Josephine Reid's hands as the stagecoach rattled over another bump in the dusty road. At 32 years old, she had finally gathered enough courage to leave behind her life as a seamstress in Boston to answer an advertisement for a wife in the Montana Territory. It was 1885, and she was almost certainly too old to be embarking on such a foolish adventure. "You'll be back within a month," her sister had warned. "Men out west want young brides who can bear them a dozen children, not spinsters past their prime." The words had stung, but Josephine had packed her trunks anyway. What awaited her in Sweetwater Creek couldn't possibly be worse than the pitying glances and whispers that followed her through Boston's cobblestone streets. The other passengers in the stagecoach, a young couple barely out of their teens, and a traveling salesman had fallen into an uncomfortable silence after learning of her purpose in Montana Territory. The young bride had covered her mouth to hide her smirk when Josephine mentioned her age, while her husband pretended sudden interest in the passing landscape. "Sweetwater Creek coming up," the driver called from above, his voice barely audible over the rumble of wheels and the jangle of harnesses. Josephine smoothed the wrinkles from her blue traveling dress and adjusted her hat. First impressions mattered, even if her correspondence with Mr. Gabriel Reed had spanned 6 months. His letters had been thoughtful and kind, if somewhat reserved. He'd mentioned being 38, a cattle rancher with a modest spread, and in need of companionship after years of solitude. He hadn't specified wanting a younger woman, but surely he'd expected one. The stagecoach lurched to a stop before a dusty main street lined with wooden buildings. Sweetwater Creek was larger than Josephine had imagined a proper town, with a general store, a saloon, what appeared to be a small church, and various other establishments stretching into the distance. A small crowd had gathered near the stagecoach stop. Josephine's heart fluttered as she scanned the faces, wondering which belonged to Gabriel Reed. Would he be disappointed? Would he take one look at her and rescind his proposal? "You must be Miss Reed," a woman said as Josephine descended from the stagecoach. She was stout with graying hair and a severe expression. "I'm Mrs. Hollister, wife of the town mayor. Mr. Reed asked me to collect you and bring you to my boarding house. He'll call on you this evening." "Oh," Josephine said, trying to mask her disappointment. She'd expected Gabriel to meet her himself. "How kind of you. Your trunks will be brought along shortly," Mrs. Hollister continued, eyeing Josephine with undisguised curiosity. "It's a brief walk to my establishment." As they moved down the street, Josephine felt eyes upon her. 2 women standing outside the general store whispered behind their hands, their gazes following her progress. "That's her," one asked, not bothering to lower her voice. "Gabe Reed's mail-order bride. Why, she must be 30 if she's a day, poor Gabe," the other replied. After waiting all this time, and this is what arrives, heat rushed to Josephine's cheeks, but she kept her head high, pretending not to hear. Mrs. Hollister quickened their pace. "Pay them no mind," the older woman muttered. "This town has too few diversions and too many wagging tongues." The boarding house was a 2-story structure with a neat porch and curtained windows. Inside, the furnishings were simple but clean. Mrs. Hollister showed Josephine to a small room on the 2nd floor. "Supper is at 6, she said, pausing at the door. "And Miss Reed, Mr. Reed is a good man. One of our finest. Whatever expectations you may have formed through your correspondence, I'd advise you to remember that." Josephine unpacked her belongings with trembling hands, arranging her modest collection of dresses in the wardrobe and placing her sewing kit on the small desk. She'd brought fabric and patterns, hoping to establish herself as a seamstress if things didn't work out with Gabriel. A woman needed contingency plans. At 6:30, Mrs. Hollister knocked on her door. "Mr. Reed is downstairs waiting for you." Josephine's heart leapt to her throat. She checked her reflection one last time, pinching her cheeks for color and smoothing an errant strand of chestnut hair back into her simple updo. Taking a deep breath, she descended the stairs. A tall man stood in the parlor, hat in hands, speaking quietly with Mr. Hollister. He turned as Josephine entered, and she found herself looking into the warmest brown eyes she'd ever seen. They crinkled at the corners as if he smiled often, though his expression now was serious. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's growth of beard. His dark hair was flecked with silver at the temples. "Miss Reid," he said, his voice deep and steady. "I'm Gabriel Reed, Mr. Reed," she replied, extending her hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." He took her hand gently, and something passed between them, a current of recognition, perhaps, or simply relief. His grip was warm and calloused, the hand of a man who worked his land. "I hope your journey wasn't too taxing," he said, releasing her hand reluctantly. "The stage can be a trial even in good weather." "It was manageable," she assured him, aware of the Hollisters watching their exchange with interest. "Your letters prepared me well for what to expect." A flash of something crossed his face, concern, perhaps. "Mrs. Hollister has been looking after you properly." "Very well, thank you." "Good." He cleared his throat. "I thought you might join me for supper at the hotel restaurant. It's the finest establishment in town, which isn't saying much, but the food is honest." "I'd like that," Josephine said, reaching for her shawl. As Gabriel escorted her down the street, Josephine was acutely aware of the eyes following them. From the saloon came a low whistle and a comment she couldn't quite hear, but Gabriel's jaw tightened. The hotel restaurant was dimly lit and relatively quiet. They were shown to a corner table, and Gabriel ordered for them both after consulting with Josephine on her preferences. "I must apologize for not meeting you at the stage," he said once they were alone. "There was trouble with a sick calf that couldn't wait." "There's no need for apologies," Josephine assured him. "Your animals must come first." "Not always," he said quietly, "but I appreciate your understanding." A silence fell between them, not entirely uncomfortable but weighted with unspoken questions. "Miss Reid," "Mr. Reid," they both spoke at once, then smiled at the awkward moment. "Please," he gestured for her to continue. Josephine took a deep breath. "Mr. Reid, I feel I should address something immediately. I am 32 years old, which I mentioned in my letters but perhaps didn't emphasize sufficiently. If that changes your mind about our arrangement, I would understand completely." Gabriel studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Miss Reid, do you know why I placed that advertisement? You mentioned seeking companionship." "Yes, but there's more to it." He leaned forward slightly. "I came to Montana Territory 15 years ago with nothing but determination and a gift for understanding cattle. I've built my ranch from nothing, worked every day until my hands bled, and now I have something worth sharing with someone. But I didn't want just anyone." He paused as their food arrived, hearty beef stew with fresh baked bread. "In those 15 years," Gabriel continued once they were alone again, "I've watched men bring young brides out here who withered like cut flowers. Girls who'd never known hardship, who couldn't adjust to the isolation or the work. I wanted a woman who knew her own mind, who had lived enough to understand what she was choosing." Josephine felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the stew. "And you think I'm that woman?" "Your letters showed me a person of intelligence, honesty, and practical sense. You didn't romanticize the West or marriage. You asked questions about winter provisions and crop rotations." His eyes crinkled. "Most women ask about the size of the house or whether there's a piano." Josephine smiled despite herself. "I've never played the piano. But you can sew, cook, keep accounts, and you mentioned nursing experience during the war." "I was very young then, just a girl really, but yes, I volunteered in a hospital in Boston." Gabriel nodded. "Those skills matter more out here than youth or fashionable accomplishments." He hesitated. "If I'm being entirely honest, Miss Reid, when I saw you step off that stage today, I thought to myself, there she is, the woman I've been waiting for." Josephine felt her cheeks flush. "You're very kind, Mr. Reid." "Not kind, truthful." He broke off a piece of bread. "Now, I want you to understand something. Our arrangement was for you to come to Sweetwater Creek and for us to determine if we suit. There's no obligation for you to marry me if you find you don't care for me or for the life here. I appreciate that. My ranch is 10 miles outside of town. It's not grand, but it's comfortable enough. If you'd like, I can take you there tomorrow so you can see it for yourself." "I would like that very much." They finished their meal with lighter conversation. Gabriel told her about his ranch, his small herd of cattle, the vegetable garden he'd started with limited success, and his 2 faithful dogs. Josephine shared stories of Boston, her work as a seamstress, and her reasons for answering his advertisement. "My parents died 5 years ago," she explained. "My sister is married with 4 children. There was no place for me there anymore." Gabriel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It takes courage to leave everything familiar behind." "Or desperation," she replied with a small smile. "Often they're the same thing." As they walked back to the boarding house, Gabriel offered his arm and Josephine took it, appreciating his solid presence beside her. The night air was cool, stars scattered like diamond dust across the vast Montana sky. "I've never seen so many stars," she remarked, gazing upward. "Wait until you see them from the ranch," Gabriel said. "With no town lights, it's like you could reach up and touch them." They paused at the boarding house steps. "I'll come for you at 9 tomorrow morning," Gabriel said. "Wear something suitable for riding. The wagon journey can be uncomfortable. I'll be ready." He hesitated, then took her hand and bowed slightly over it. "Good night, Miss Reid." "I'm very glad you've come." "As am I, Mr. Reid." Josephine watched him walk away, his tall figure dissolving into the shadows of the street. Only when he had disappeared completely did she turn and enter the boarding house, where Mrs. Hollister was waiting with poorly concealed curiosity. "Well," the older woman asked, "what did you think of our Mr. Reid?" Josephine considered her answer carefully. "He seems a thoughtful man. That he is too thoughtful for his own good sometimes." Mrs. Hollister folded her arms. "You should know that half the unmarried women in this county have set their caps for Gabriel Reed over the years. He's always been polite but uninterested." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Until you." Josephine wasn't sure how to respond. "We've only just met." "He's been corresponding with you for 6 months. That's longer than most courtships around here." Mrs. Hollister's expression softened slightly. "Don't mind the talk. People will always find something to gossip about in a small town. Thank you for the warning." "It's not a warning, dear. It's encouragement." With that cryptic statement, Mrs. Hollister bid her good night. In her room, Josephine sat at the small desk and opened her journal. She had recorded her journey from Boston in its pages, and now she found herself trying to capture her impressions of Gabriel Reed. Thoughtful, yes. Kind, certainly. But there was something else, a steadiness to him, a quiet strength that had nothing to do with his physical presence. Whatever happened, she thought as she closed the journal, she would not regret coming to Montana. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through her window. Josephine dressed in her most practical outfit, a brown skirt and white blouse with a matching jacket. She twisted her hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck and added a bonnet that would provide some protection from the sun. Gabriel arrived precisely at 9, driving a wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses. He smiled when he saw her waiting on the porch, and Josephine's heart gave an unexpected flutter. "Good morning, Miss Reid," he called, jumping down to help her with her small bag. "You look ready for a journey." "Good morning, Mr. Reid. I am indeed ready." He helped her onto the wagon seat, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The touch was brief but left an impression that lingered as he climbed up beside her and took the reins. "It's about 2 hours to the ranch," he explained as they left the town behind. "The road is rough in places, but the view makes up for it." The landscape opened before them as they traveled rolling hills covered in grass that rippled like water in the breeze. Distant mountains still capped with snow, despite the late spring season, and wildflowers dotting the meadows with splashes of color. "It's beautiful," Josephine breathed, taking it all in. "It can be harsh too," Gabriel cautioned. "Winters here test a person's resolve. Snowdrifts higher than this wagon, temperatures that freeze the breath in your lungs." "You're trying to scare me off," she observed with a small smile. He glanced at her, amusement in his eyes. "Just being honest. I want you to know what you'd be choosing." "I appreciate honesty above all things, Mr. Reid." They fell into comfortable conversation as the wagon rumbled along the dirt road. Gabriel pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area's history, including encounters with local Native American tribes. "The Crow people have been fair neighbors," he explained. "We've had our misunderstandings, but there's respect between us now. They sometimes trade with me beautiful beadwork for beef or tools." "You speak as if you admire them," Josephine noted. "I do. They understand this land in ways I'm still learning. He glanced at her. That might not be a popular view in Boston drawing rooms. I'm no longer in Boston drawing rooms, she reminded him, and I've always believed in forming my own opinions. His smile told her she'd given the right answer. As they crested a hill, Gabriel drew the horses to a stop. There it is, he said, pointing ahead. Reed Ranch. Josephine followed his gesture and saw a valley spread below them. A modest house made of logs stood near a small creek, with several outbuildings nearby. A corral contained horses, and in the distance, cattle grazed on green pastures. It wasn't grand, but there was something appealing about its honest simplicity. It's lovely, she said sincerely. It's home, Gabriel replied, a note of pride in his voice. He flicked the reins and they continued down toward the ranch. As they approached, 2 dogs came bounding out to meet them, barking joyfully. Gabriel introduced them as Scout and Bear, a border collie and a large dog of indeterminate breeding. They're part of the family, he explained as they circled the wagon. The house was larger than it had appeared from a distance. Inside, Josephine found a surprisingly comfortable home. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace, sturdy furniture, and shelves lined with books. 2 doors led off to what Gabriel explained were bedrooms. This would be your room, he said, showing her a pleasant space with a window overlooking the creek. I built the furniture myself. The bed was simple but beautifully crafted, as was the chest of drawers and small writing desk. You're quite skilled, Josephine observed, running her hand over the smooth wood of the desk. Winter evenings are long, he said with a shrug. A man needs occupation. He showed her the rest of the ranch, the barn with its hayloft and stalls, the chicken coop, the vegetable garden he'd mentioned, which was more successful than he'd let on, and the smokehouse where he preserved meat. It's a working ranch, he told her as they walked. Every day brings chores that can't be postponed. Cattle need tending, fences need mending, crops need planting and harvesting. And where would I fit into all this? Josephine asked. Gabriel considered her question seriously. That would be for us to determine together. I don't expect you to become a ranch hand, but neither would you be merely decorative. Most ranch wives I know work alongside their husbands according to their skills and strengths. A partnership, then. Exactly so. Out here, that's the only way to survive. They had lunch on the porch: cold chicken, bread, and early spring vegetables from Gabriel's garden. As they ate, he told her more about his daily routine and his occasional dealings with neighboring ranchers. My nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, he said. The isolation can be difficult for some. I've spent much of my life surrounded by people while feeling entirely alone, Josephine admitted. Perhaps isolation with the right companion would be preferable. Gabriel's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. Would you like to see the rest of the property? He asked when they'd finished eating. Gabriel saddled 2 horses, a gentle mare named Daisy for Josephine and his own gelding, Thunder. They rode across the rolling land of the ranch, Gabriel pointing out the boundaries of his property and sharing his plans for expansion. I'd like to add another 50 head of cattle next year, he explained. The market in Helena is growing and the railroad makes shipping easier. Josephine listened attentively, asking questions that showed her practical mind. Gabriel seemed pleased by her interest, answering fully and without condescension. They stopped by the creek where it widened into a small pool. Dismounting, they let the horses drink while they sat on a fallen log. May I ask you something personal, Mr. Reed? Josephine ventured after a comfortable silence. Of course. Why have you never married before now? You mentioned being here 15 years. Gabriel looked out over the water, his expression thoughtful. I came here with my brother, Thomas. We had a plan to build something together. 3 years in, he died of pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. He paused, old grief evident in his voice. After that, I threw myself into making the ranch succeed, as if proving we'd been right to come west might somehow honor his memory. I'm sorry about your brother, Josephine said softly. Gabriel nodded his acknowledgement. By the time I looked up and realized how alone I was, I found myself a man nearing 40 with little practice in courtship. The few women in the area were either married or seemed unsuited to the life I could offer. So you decided on a mail-order bride. Eventually, yes, though I corresponded with several women before you. He looked at her directly. None of them seemed right until your first letter arrived. What was different about my letter? Josephine asked, genuinely curious. You didn't write about dreams or romantic notions. You wrote about wanting purpose, about being willing to work for a future, and you asked about winter provisions. His eyes crinkled. I knew then you were a practical woman. Josephine laughed. I've been called worse things. They returned to the ranch as the afternoon waned, and Gabriel showed her the final outbuilding, a small structure separate from the others. This was going to be Thomas's house, eventually, he explained as he opened the door. I've maintained it over the years. Inside was a single room with a stone fireplace similar to the main house. But what caught Josephine's attention was the loom set up near the window. You weave? She asked, surprised. No, but I thought you might like to. Gabriel looked slightly embarrassed. You mentioned in your letters that you enjoyed working with fabrics, creating things with your hands. I thought perhaps. He trailed off, and Josephine felt a rush of warmth at his thoughtfulness. You bought this for me, before we'd even met. I wanted you to have something that was yours, he said simply. A space where you could create. Josephine was touched beyond words. In Boston, her sewing had been necessity, a way to earn her keep. No one had ever seen it as something to be encouraged for its own sake. Thank you, she said softly. This means more than I can express. As evening approached, Gabriel prepared a simple but satisfying dinner. They ate at the kitchen table, and Josephine found herself more relaxed than she'd been in years. There was something about Gabriel's quiet presence that put her at ease. I should take you back to town before it gets too late, he said as they washed the dishes together. The road can be treacherous in the dark. Of course, Josephine agreed, though she felt a surprising reluctance to leave. As Gabriel hitched the horses to the wagon, Josephine took a last look around the ranch house. She could imagine herself here, she realized. Reading by the fire in winter, tending the garden in summer, creating a true home from the sturdy framework Gabriel had built. The journey back to town was quieter, both of them lost in thought as twilight settled over the land. The first stars were appearing as they reached Sweetwater Creek. I'd like to call on you tomorrow, if I may, Gabriel said as he helped her down from the wagon outside the boarding house. Perhaps we could discuss what you've decided. Josephine looked up at him, this man who had created a place for her before they'd even met. I'd like that very much. He took her hand briefly, his touch warm and reassuring. Until tomorrow, then. Mrs. Hollister was waiting in the parlor when Josephine entered, pretending to read but obviously eager for news. How did you find Mr. Reed's ranch? She asked, setting aside her book. It's very pleasant, Josephine replied, unwilling to share too much of what felt like a private experience. Mr. Reed has built something admirable there. And will you be staying in Sweetwater Creek then? Mrs. Hollister pressed. Josephine smiled slightly. Mr. Reed and I have more to discuss before any decisions are made. Well, don't take too long deciding, the older woman advised. A man like Gabriel Reed won't wait forever. Later, in her room, Josephine wrote in her journal, trying to capture the day's experiences and her growing feelings for Gabriel. He was unlike any man she'd known in Boston, straightforward without being crude, strong without being domineering, thoughtful without expecting praise for it. She thought of the loom he'd acquired for her, how he'd created a space where she could pursue her own interests. That single gesture told her more about his character than 100 letters might have done. Morning brought another beautiful day, and with it, whispers that followed Josephine as she walked to the general store to purchase a few necessities. The two women she'd overheard upon her arrival were there again, along with several others who made little effort to hide their scrutiny. I heard he showed her the ranch yesterday, one woman murmured to another. Poor man must be desperate indeed. Such a waste, another replied. He could have had his pick of younger women. Josephine kept her head high, selecting what she needed and paying with dignity. As she turned to leave, she nearly collided with a tall woman in a practical dress who appeared to be in her 40s. You must be Josephine Reid, the woman said directly. I'm Hannah Morris. I run the school here. Pleased to meet you, Josephine replied, surprised by the friendly approach. Don't mind these vultures, Hannah said, loud enough for the gossiping women to hear. They're just jealous that Gabriel chose someone with sense instead of one of their simpering daughters. The other women fell silent, several turning away in embarrassment. Would you join me for tea? Hannah continued. I'd like to know the woman who managed to interest our most eligible bachelor. Josephine accepted gratefully, and they walked to Hannah's small house beside the schoolhouse. Over tea, Hannah proved to be refreshingly forthright. Gabriel Reed is one of the few men in this town worth knowing, she stated. He treats people fairly, works honestly, and never involves himself in the pettiness that infects small communities. You know him well, Josephine asked, as well as anyone here does, which isn't saying much. Gabriel keeps to himself mostly. Hannah studied Josephine over her teacup. You're not what people expected. Because of my age, Josephine acknowledged, partly, but mostly because you seem substantial. Most women who come out here as mail-order brides are running from something or desperate for any husband at all. Hannah smiled slightly. You don't strike me as either. I came because I wanted a different life, Josephine explained. One with purpose beyond endless sewing for women who barely acknowledge my existence. And have you found it? Josephine considered the question. I believe I might have. Hannah nodded approvingly. Good, this town could use more women of character. She glanced at the clock. Forgive me, but I have lessons to prepare. Perhaps we'll speak again before you make your final decision. I'd like that, Josephine said sincerely. As she walked back to the boarding house, Josephine felt more settled. Having a potential ally in town made the prospect of staying in Sweetwater Creek more appealing. Gabriel called for her in the afternoon, looking somewhat ill at ease in a clean shirt and his best coat. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance, his dark hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. I thought we might walk by the creek, he suggested. It's peaceful there. They strolled to the edge of town, where a small creek, presumably the one that gave Sweetwater its name, meandered through a grassy area. A few benches had been placed along its banks, and Gabriel led her to one partially shaded by a cottonwood tree. I've been thinking about yesterday, he began once they were seated, about showing you the ranch and what comes next. As have I, Josephine said. He turned slightly to face her. I want to be clear about what I'm offering, Miss Reid. It wouldn't be an easy life, but it would be an honest one. I can promise to provide for you, to treat you with respect, and to be faithful. I can't promise there won't be hardships or that you'll never miss the comforts of Boston. I understand that. I also want you to know that while this began as a practical arrangement, I find myself. He hesitated, searching for words. I find myself genuinely drawn to you. Your intelligence, your practical nature, your quiet strength. I believe we could build something worthwhile together. Josephine felt warmth spread through her at his words. I feel the same way, Mr. Reed. Yesterday at your ranch I could envision a life there, a good life. Relief washed over his features. Then you'll stay, you'll marry me. Yes, she said simply, I will. Gabriel reached for her hand, his much larger one enveloping hers. Thank you, he said softly. I promise you won't regret it. When shall we be married? Josephine asked, practical even in this moment. As soon as you wish. The circuit preacher comes through town this Sunday. Or we could wait longer if you prefer. Sunday would be fine, she decided. I see no reason to delay if we're both certain. Gabriel's smile was radiant. Sunday it is, then. They sat by the creek for some time, making plans and learning more about each other. Gabriel spoke of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his father's work as a blacksmith, his decision to seek his fortune in the West. Josephine told him about growing up in Boston, losing her parents, her work during the war that had given her a taste of purpose beyond social expectations. As the sun began to set, they walked back toward town, Gabriel's hand occasionally brushing against hers as if he wanted to take it, but was respecting propriety in public. I'll come for you Sunday morning, he said as they reached the boarding house. 10 o'clock. I'll be ready, Josephine promised. This time when they parted, Gabriel bent and placed a gentle kiss on her cheek. It was brief, almost chaste, but it sent a flutter through Josephine that stayed with her as she watched him walk away. Inside, Mrs. Hollister was practically bursting with curiosity. "Well," she demanded the moment Josephine entered. "Are congratulations in order?" "They are," Josephine confirmed. "We'll be married on Sunday when the circuit preacher comes." Mrs. Hollister beamed. "Wonderful news." "We must prepare immediately. You'll need a proper dress, and there should be a small reception afterward. Nothing elaborate, of course, but the occasion should be marked." Josephine hadn't considered these details. "I brought a good dress from Boston." "Nonsense. A wedding requires something special." Mrs. Hollister was already making plans. "I'll speak with the ladies' auxiliary at church. They'll help with refreshments, and Martha at the dress shop might have something suitable, or fabric at least." Caught up in Mrs. Hollister's enthusiasm, Josephine found herself swept along. Perhaps a special dress would be appropriate. After all, this would be her only wedding day. The next few days passed in a flurry of preparations. Gabriel came daily, sometimes briefly due to ranch responsibilities, but always with small, thoughtful gestures, wildflowers he'd picked along the road. A book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. Once even a small wooden box he'd carved himself for her sewing notions. The women of Sweetwater Creek rallied around once news of the impending wedding spread. Martha from the dress shop offered a length of cream-colored silk she'd been saving for a special order, and several women gathered to help Josephine sew it into a simple but elegant wedding dress. Even the women who had gossiped about her seemed to soften, perhaps won over by Gabriel's obvious happiness or simply by the excitement of a town event. Hannah Morris proved a staunch ally, offering practical advice about ranch life and defending Josephine against any lingering criticism about her age. "Better a woman who knows her own mind than a girl who'll wilt at the first hardship," Hannah declared to anyone who would listen. Saturday evening found Josephine in her room at the boarding house, her new dress hanging ready for the morning, her few possessions packed for the move to the ranch after the ceremony. Mrs. Hollister had insisted she spend her last night as a single woman under her roof, though Gabriel had offered to take her to the ranch immediately after the wedding. A knock at her door revealed Hannah Morris bearing a small package. "A wedding gift," Hannah explained, handing it to Josephine. "Nothing elaborate, but something every ranch wife needs." Inside was a beautiful handkerchief embroidered with Josephine's soon-to-be initials JR and a small, sharp pocket knife in a leather sheath. "The handkerchief is for the ceremony," Hannah said with a smile. "The knife is for everything after. You'd be surprised how often you'll need it." "Thank you," Josephine said, touched by the thoughtfulness of both gifts, "for this and for your friendship these past days." "We women must support each other out here," Hannah replied simply. "Life is too difficult otherwise." After Hannah left, Josephine sat at the window, watching the stars appear over Sweetwater Creek. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Gabriel Reed. The thought filled her with a quiet joy tinged with nervous anticipation. She barely knew him, really, yet she felt as if she'd been moving toward him her entire life. Sunday dawned clear and mild, a perfect spring day for a wedding. Josephine dressed carefully in her new cream-colored dress, arranging her hair in a more elaborate style than usual and pinning Hannah's handkerchief to her bodice. Mrs. Hollister brought a bouquet of wildflowers gathered that morning and fussed over final adjustments to Josephine's appearance. "You look lovely," the older woman declared, her usual brusque manner softened by sentiment. "Absolutely lovely." At precisely 10 o'clock, Gabriel arrived at the boarding house. He wore a new black suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, his dark hair neatly combed, his face clean-shaven. When Josephine descended the stairs, his expression of awe and admiration made her feel truly beautiful for perhaps the first time in her life. "Miss Reed," he said softly, "you take my breath away." "As do you, Mr. Reed," she replied, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. They walked together to the small church where it seemed the entire town had gathered. The circuit preacher, a kindly older man named Reverend Johnson, waited for them at the altar. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, both bride and groom speaking their vows in clear, confident voices. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Gabriel's kiss was gentle but conveyed a promise of deeper passion to come. The reception was held in the church hall, where the women of Sweetwater Creek had prepared a feast that belied the town's modest means. Even those who had initially gossiped about Josephine came forward with congratulations and gifts preserves, handmade linens, practical items for their home. "Seems you've won them over," Gabriel murmured during a quiet moment together. "Or perhaps they simply love a wedding," Josephine replied with a smile. "Either way, I'm grateful." He squeezed her hand. "Are you ready to go home?" The word home sent a thrill through her. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." They departed amid cheers and well wishes, climbing into Gabriel's wagon, which had been decorated with ribbons and flowers by some of the town's younger residents. As they left Sweetwater Creek behind, Josephine felt a chapter of her life closing and another, more promising one beginning. The journey to the ranch, their ranch now, was filled with comfortable conversation and occasional companionable silences. Gabriel pointed out a family of deer grazing in a distant meadow, and Josephine spotted an eagle soaring overhead. "A good omen," Gabriel said, following her gaze to the majestic bird. "Eagles mate for life, you know." As they approached the ranch, Josephine noticed changes from her previous visit. The porch had been swept clean, and pots of flowers flanked the door. Inside, the house was immaculate, with fresh curtains at the windows and a new quilt on what was now their bed. "Hannah and some of the other women came out yesterday," Gabriel explained, noting her surprise. "They insisted on preparing the house for you. I wasn't allowed inside until they were finished." "How kind of them," Josephine said, touched by the gesture. "They want you to feel welcome." Gabriel set down her trunk in their bedroom. "As do I." There was a moment of awkwardness, as they both acknowledged the intimacy that would now be part of their relationship. Gabriel broke the tension by suggesting they take a walk around the property before supper. "I want you to see everything in the light of it being yours now, too," he explained. They walked hand in hand, the dogs bounding ahead of them, as Gabriel pointed out projects he was planning: expanding the vegetable garden, adding another room to the house eventually, improving the irrigation system from the creek. "What would you like to change or add?" he asked as they returned to the house. "This is your home now. It should reflect your preferences too." Josephine considered the question seriously. "Perhaps a few more flowers near the house, and I noticed the kitchen lacks adequate shelving for preserves." Gabriel nodded. "Both easily accomplished. What else?" His genuine interest in her opinion reinforced Josephine's belief that she'd made the right decision. This was truly to be a partnership. As evening fell, they prepared supper together, moving around the kitchen with surprising ease for two people unaccustomed to sharing such a space. Afterward, they sat on the porch, watching the stars appear in the vast Montana sky. "I've never seen anything so beautiful," Josephine said, gazing upward. "Nor have I," Gabriel replied, but when she turned, she found him looking at her, not the stars. Later, in the privacy of their bedroom, any remaining awkwardness between them dissolved in the gentle discovery of each other. Gabriel was a considerate lover, attentive to Josephine's comfort and pleasure. For her part, Josephine found that passion was not, as she'd been led to believe, solely the province of youth. Their coming together felt right, a physical manifestation of the bond already forming between them. Afterward, lying in Gabriel's arms, Josephine felt a contentment she hadn't known was possible. This man, this place, they were now the center of her world, and she found herself profoundly grateful for whatever twist of fate had brought her here. "Happy," Gabriel murmured, his voice drowsy. "Very," she assured him, and felt his arms tighten around her in response. The days that followed established a rhythm to their life together. Gabriel rose before dawn to tend to the cattle and other morning chores. Josephine prepared breakfast and then turned to her own tasks: gathering eggs, tending the vegetable garden, preparing preserves from early summer berries, and beginning to transform the house with small, personal touches. In the evenings, they shared the day's events over supper, then often read together by lamplight or simply sat on the porch, talking or enjoying comfortable silence. On Sundays, they sometimes attended church in Sweetwater Creek, gradually becoming part of the community as a married couple rather than individuals. Josephine found unexpected joy in learning the routines of ranch life. Gabriel taught her to ride properly, and she often accompanied him on shorter rounds of the property. She discovered she had a knack for working with the chickens, increasing egg production through better care, and her garden flourished under her attention. The loom Gabriel had provided became a true pleasure as she taught herself to weave, starting with simple dish towels and progressing to more complex patterns. Gabriel built her additional shelving in the kitchen, as promised, and added window boxes for the flowers she wanted. Their physical relationship deepened as they grew more comfortable with each other, passion blooming between them with increasing frequency and abandon. Josephine discovered aspects of herself she'd never known existed, and Gabriel proved a willing and enthusiastic partner in her exploration. 6 weeks after their wedding, Hannah Morris rode out to the ranch for a visit. She found Josephine in the garden, harvesting early vegetables. "Marriage agrees with you," Hannah observed after they'd exchanged greetings. "You're positively glowing." Josephine smiled, knowing it was true. She felt healthier and more vibrant than she had in years. "It does seem to suit me." They had tea on the porch, and Hannah shared news from town births, deaths, scandals, and celebrations. "Those women who gossiped about you being too old," Hannah said with a mischievous smile. "They're eating their words now. Everyone can see Gabriel is happier than he's ever been." "As am I," Josephine admitted. "Any chance of making him happier still?" Hannah asked, her meaning clear. Josephine hesitated. "It's early days yet," she said carefully. At 32, she knew her chances of motherhood were perhaps less than a younger woman's, but not impossible. "We'll see what God intends." After Hannah left, Josephine found herself considering the possibility more seriously. A child had not been part of her calculations when she'd come west, but now, with Gabriel, the idea held unexpected appeal. They hadn't discussed it directly, but perhaps they should. That evening, after supper, she broached the subject as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Hannah asked today if we were hoping for children," she said, trying to sound casual. Gabriel turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "What did you tell her?" "That it was early days yet." Josephine hesitated. "But I realized we haven't discussed it, you and I." Gabriel reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "I would welcome children if they come," he said simply. "But if they don't, I won't consider our marriage lacking. You're enough for me, Josephine." The use of her full name, something he did only in moments of deep feeling, made her heart swell. "And you for me," she assured him, "but I find I would like to try if you're willing." His smile was answer enough, and that night, their lovemaking held a new dimension, the possibility of creation beyond the pleasure they gave each other. Summer passed in a blur of activity. The cattle thrived, the garden produced abundantly, and Josephine found herself fully immersed in the rhythms of ranch life. She made weekly trips into town for supplies, gradually building friendships with the women who had initially been so judgmental. Her skill with a needle proved valuable as she began taking in mending and special sewing projects, adding to the ranch's income. Gabriel expanded his herd earlier than planned, purchasing 30 head of cattle from a rancher moving further west. The additional work kept him busy from dawn until dusk, but he never failed to make time for Josephine, even if only to share a quick meal or a few minutes of conversation. Their partnership deepened as they faced the challenges of ranch life together. When a sudden storm threatened to destroy the hay they'd cut for winter feed, they worked side by side through the night to secure it. When Gabriel fell ill with a fever, Josephine nursed him back to health with herbs and remedies she'd learned during her hospital work in the war. In late August, as the first hints of autumn touched the landscape, Josephine missed her monthly courses. She waited another week before mentioning it to Gabriel, not wanting to raise hopes prematurely. "I believe I may be with child," she told him one evening as they sat by the fire. The nights having grown cooler, Gabriel's expression transformed from surprise to wonder to joy in the space of a heartbeat. "Truly, it's early yet," she cautioned. "And at my age, hush," he said gently, kneeling before her chair and taking both her hands in his. "You're not old, Josephine. You're exactly the right age to be my wife and the mother of my child." He kissed her then, a kiss full of promise and reverence, and Josephine felt tears prick at her eyes. This man, who had advertised for a practical companion, had given her so much more love, respect, partnership, and now the chance at motherhood. As autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, Josephine's condition became more certain. The town doctor confirmed what they already knew, estimating the baby would arrive in late March or early April. News spread quickly through Sweetwater Creek, and Josephine found herself the recipient of advice, hand-me-down baby clothes, and knowing smiles from the women who had once whispered about her age. "Told you so," Hannah said smugly during one of her visits. "Nothing wrong with being a mature bride." Gabriel was solicitous without being smothering, encouraging Josephine to remain active while ensuring she didn't overtax herself. He took on more household duties, built a cradle that was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, and began making plans to add the additional room to the house before winter set in. "The baby won't need it immediately," Josephine pointed out as he marked off the dimensions. "There's time." "Perhaps," Gabriel agreed, "but I want everything ready well before the little one arrives." With the help of 2 neighboring ranchers, Gabriel completed the addition before the first snow fell, a snug room adjacent to their bedroom with a small fireplace and a window that would catch the morning sun. Winter descended on the Montana territory with typical severity, but the Reed Ranch was well prepared. The larder was full, the woodpiles stacked high, the cattle sheltered in protected areas of the property. Inside the warm house, Josephine continued her weaving and sewing, now focused on baby clothes and blankets. She and Gabriel spent the long evenings planning for the future, discussing names for the child, and sharing dreams for the life they were building together. Josephine had never known such contentment or such purpose. As her body changed, growing round with new life, Gabriel's desire for her never wavered. If anything, he seemed to find her more beautiful than ever, a fact he demonstrated with both words and actions. Josephine blossomed under his admiration, shedding the last vestiges of insecurity that had followed her from Boston. Christmas came with a heavy snowfall that isolated them from town, but they celebrated quietly together, exchanging simple gifts and sharing memories of holidays past. Gabriel had never been much for celebration, he admitted, but with Josephine, he found himself wanting to mark the special days, to create traditions they could pass on to their child. January and February passed in a blur of snowstorms and cozy days indoors. Josephine's condition progressed normally, though the baby was active, kicking and moving frequently, especially at night. "Strong like its father," Josephine would say as Gabriel placed his hand on her belly to feel the movements. "Determined like its mother," he would counter with a smile. In early March, the weather began to moderate, allowing Gabriel to make a trip into town for supplies and to alert the doctor that the birth was approaching. He returned with news, letters that had accumulated over the winter, and a surprising package. "It's from your sister," he explained, handing Josephine a carefully wrapped parcel. "Apparently, she wrote to you at the boarding house, and Mrs. Hollister forwarded her your new address." Josephine opened the package with trembling hands. Inside was a beautiful christening gown, obviously an heirloom, along with a letter. "My dearest Josephine," the letter began, "news of your marriage and impending motherhood has reached us here in Boston. I confess I was wrong to discourage your adventure west, and I am heartily sorry for my lack of faith in you. This christening gown was worn by our grandfather and all his descendants. It belongs now to your child. I hope one day to meet my new niece or nephew, and to make amends for my unkindness. Your loving sister, Elizabeth." Tears flowed freely down Josephine's cheeks as she finished reading. Gabriel knelt beside her chair, concerned. "Are you well? Is it bad news?" "No," she assured him, wiping her eyes. "Quite the opposite. It seems my sister has had a change of heart." She showed him the christening gown, its delicate embroidery and fine fabric a stark contrast to the practical clothes they'd prepared for the baby. "It's beautiful," Gabriel said, "like its future owner will be." Josephine's labor began on a clear morning in late March. Gabriel sent one of the neighboring ranchers' sons for the doctor and set about making Josephine as comfortable as possible. By the time Dr. Wilson arrived, things were progressing rapidly. First babies usually take their time, the doctor commented as he examined Josephine. But this one seems eager to meet the world. 8 hours later, Josephine gave birth to a healthy baby girl with a lusty cry and a shock of dark hair like her father's. "She's perfect," Gabriel whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he held his daughter for the first time. Absolutely perfect. They named her Grace, Elizabeth Reed Grace, for the blessing she represented in their lives, and Elizabeth in a gesture of reconciliation toward Josephine's sister. The days that followed were a haze of exhaustion and joy as they adjusted to life with a newborn. Gabriel proved to be a natural father, as comfortable changing diapers as he was herding cattle. Josephine recovered quickly from the birth, her body strong despite her advanced age, as Dr. Wilson had tactfully put it. When Grace was 2 weeks old, Gabriel took them into town for her christening at the little church. The entire community turned out for the event, the same women who had once gossiped about Josephine's age now cooing over her beautiful daughter. "She has your eyes," Mrs. Hollister declared, peering at the baby in her antique christening gown. "And her father's determined chin," Hannah added with a smile. After the ceremony, there was a small celebration at the hotel restaurant. As Gabriel moved around the room, proudly showing off his daughter, Josephine found herself beside Hannah. "Happy?" the schoolteacher asked quietly. Josephine looked across the room at her husband, now deep in conversation with Reverend Johnson, their daughter cradled securely in his strong arms. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the courage it had taken to leave Boston, the uncertainty of answering an advertisement, the whispers and doubts she'd faced upon arrival. And then she thought of what she'd found: a man who valued her for exactly who she was, a partnership based on mutual respect and growing love, a home created through shared effort, and now a child who represented all their hopes for the future. "Yes," she said simply. "Happier than I ever imagined possible." Hannah squeezed her hand. "You were exactly what he was waiting for, you know. Everyone can see that now." As if sensing they were talking about him, Gabriel looked up and caught Josephine's eye across the room. His smile, tender, proud, loving, warmed her to her core. He made his way back to her side, little Grace still sleeping peacefully in his arms. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Reed?" he asked softly. "More than ready, Mr. Reed," she replied. As they drove back to the ranch, their daughter secured between them, Josephine reflected on the strange, wonderful path that had led her here. At 32, she had been considered too old for new beginnings in Boston. But here, in the vast openness of Montana, age had proven to be just a number, far less important than character, determination, and the capacity for love. The ranch came into view as they crested the final hill, their home, their future. In the late afternoon light, it looked like a painting, the log house solid and welcoming against the backdrop of rolling hills and distant mountains. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Gabriel said, following her gaze. "Perfect," Josephine agreed, knowing she meant not just the view but everything it represented, the life they'd built together and would continue building, one day at a time. As they pulled up to the house, the dogs came bounding out to greet them, then sat obediently when Gabriel reminded them to be gentle around the baby. Together, the three of them, now a family, entered their home, closing the door on the outside world and stepping into the warmth of the life they'd created together. That night, after Grace was fed and settled in her cradle, Gabriel and Josephine stood together by the window, looking out at the star-filled Montana sky. "Thank you," Gabriel said softly, his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "For what?" Josephine asked, leaning back against his solid strength. "For answering my advertisement, for coming west, for being exactly who you are." He turned her gently to face him. "For being the one I was waiting for, even when I didn't know it." Josephine reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines at the corners of his eyes, the curve of his jaw that their daughter had inherited. "And thank you for waiting for me, even when others thought you should settle for less." His kiss was tender, a promise renewed with each passing day. From the cradle came a small sound, not a cry, just a baby's sigh, and they both smiled. "She's dreaming," Josephine whispered. "Of all the adventures ahead of her," Gabriel agreed. "She'll grow up strong here knowing she's loved." As will all our children, Josephine said, a hint of mischief in her voice. Gabriel's eyebrows rose. All, you're planning more. Perhaps one or two, she teased, if you're agreeable. His answer was another kiss, deeper this time, full of promise and passion. Mrs. Reid, I am agreeable to whatever future you envision for us. As they moved toward their bed, Josephine felt a profound gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought her to this place, this man, this life. At 33 now, she was exactly where she was meant to be, not too old, not too anything except perfectly, wonderfully herself. Outside, the Montana stars continued their eternal dance across the sky, witnesses to the love that had blossomed against all expectations in the heart of the Wild West. Inside, a family slept, a man who had waited for the right woman rather than settling for the expected one. A woman who had found courage to seek a new beginning when others thought her time had passed, and a baby girl who represented all their hopes for the future. And in the years that followed, as the Reid family grew, first with a son 2 years later, then with another daughter 2 years after that, the story of how they began became something of a legend in Sweetwater Creek. The tale of a mail-order bride considered too old, and the cowboy who had declared she was the only one he'd been waiting for. It was a story Josephine and Gabriel told their children, and eventually, their grandchildren, a reminder that love comes when it will, that age is just a number, and that the bravest journeys often lead to the most unexpected and wonderful destinations.